Recording has started. Kevin Tyers, what's going on, buddy?
Oh man, just in the middle of this long vacation. Obviously, in the first episode I mentioned I worked for PayPal. That is no longer the case. So I'm sort of in between jobs at the moment, but I got something else lined up that once I get my first paycheck for my new gig, I'll talk about what it is. So
Fair enough. That's
yeah,
exciting.
it's been good. Been traveling. Went to Hawaii. Going to Cali next week, and it'll be good. Since spending some time with the family, it's been all right.
Yeah. You sound really stressed. I feel bad for you.
That's fair. Yeah, it's been pretty tough. It's been like 7 weeks since I've worked, and I'm actually going a little bit stir crazy. I got a class coming up though, so that's cool, and then that'll keep me busy, and then back into the real world, I guess.
Heck yeah, where are you teaching?
It's a virtual online. It's a private class, so. But if anyone who's watching wants to take a class with me, I'll be teaching in Sands Rocky Mountain in October in Denver, Colorado. So I'm teaching 504 there. So come through and check it out.
Right on. And with that, we've got introductions, right? So for anyone who doesn't know, that man on my left, at least should be in the video, Mr. Kevin Tyers. Thank you for joining us. If you don't know me, I'm Mike Bonner. I don't know how you found this video if you don't know me, but welcome. Happy to have you. So what we're talking about today, CIS Control, number 4. Do you know what that is off the top of your head, Kevin?
I don't prep for these, so.
No, that's fair. It is secure configurations.
Okay.
It's just, I love talking about that. So to start us off, what does it mean? Secure configurations. It feels very self-explanatory to me, but I can understand that's maybe not the case for anybody that's watching this. So what is it? The idea is that as you get a product, an appliance, anything out of the box, you should be changing the base configuration. Now, this may shock some people, but vendors don't configure things securely out of the box. I know, crazy.
Shocking.
Right?
That is very shocking.
Yeah, I've been knocked off my chair.
So would you say not assigning a valid certificate to an appliance would be an example of this?
I mean, if you're running any kind of vulnerability management engine, yeah. I can think of other places to start. I'd start first and foremost with a username and password.
Yeah,
I find not running devices as Cisco, for anyone that may have touched one of their switches, routers, or other products, to be a great first start.
Yeah. See, we got admin, right? Change me. That's always a good one.
So, along those lines, I have tons of crazy stories. And I think that the first time that this really hit home for me was when Windows 10, or no, I take it back, Windows 7 first came out. And I was already in the security game for a while, and people knew me. I was running a large security organization. And when Windows 7 is like, yeah, we're going to have write protected memory, DEP, ASLR, like all of these controls in place, somebody asked me, hey, Mike, are you worried about not having a job anymore? And I actually was a little worried, because I'm like, well, I mean, if Microsoft really locks everything down and does a good job, I mean, that's going to be 90% of my workload right there. What am I going to do? And then the very next day I logged into a system with admin change me, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to be here forever.
Yeah. I was reading a thread. I think it was in a mailing list I was in, or maybe it was in DC480 chat, where it was talking about CISOs and technical problems. And it's most problems that a CISO deals with is actually more people doing stupid stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, my favorite equivalent, coming from my background, is people complaining that a firewall is not working, or outbound traffic is being allowed that shouldn't be. And I'm like, okay, what's up? And then I look, and then IP allow any in both directions is configured in an ACL. And I'm like, oh, yeah, no, for sure. And knowing the order that the rules are executed, because if you put that any at the top, at least on a Cisco, right, all the rules under it doesn't matter. So first match and exit behavior.
Yeah. And Kevin and you and I have a good friend in common, and I won't mention his name because I don't know that he'd be cool with it, but he's a pen tester. and we were going to be running an assessment on a very large MSSP. Basically, a customer had brought us in to do some efficacy testing of their MSSP. Like, we don't know if our MSSP is doing a great job. We'd like you to come in and make a bunch of noise and see if they catch it.
Yeah.
And so our friend is sitting next to us and he goes, "Hey man, I just got into a box with default credentials." And I was like, and the range that I had given him was the range for domain controllers, because we're just trying to be as noisy as possible.
Yeah.
And I looked over, I was like, "Hey, can you show me what your scan did? Because what I'm thinking happened is it got some kind of unexpected input back and basically assumed, hey, this was a valid response." And I was like, "There's no way anything in here is running default credentials. There's no way anyone would do that." And he looks over, he goes, "It looks like I got in with admin change me." And so, sure enough, we tried it. And it was something that was mission critical to a massive organization that processed billions of gigs of very important data every day.
Yeah.
And we were blown away that it was sitting like that for years.
Yeah. I always try to be somewhat sympathetic, believe it or not, which I know is not very likely.
Definitely not.
To the people who are running the infrastructure. And I sometimes wonder with things like that. This is similar to a story that you had mentioned to me, but maybe not in this case, but how many times does that happen because they've restored something from a snapshot?
Yeah.
Or, there was some sort of weird auto scaling group that got stood up and some web app had an old code pulled and, probably in that case, there was some backend authentication, but you get what I'm going for, right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes it can be secure and then a change happens in the environment and then it's rolled back, right? So secure configuration management is more than just doing it right the first time. It's about sort of perpetually having a regime of being able to verify oh, hey, this didn't get reverted to this, either by accident or on purpose.
Absolutely. And so in an effort to make this video series be useful, especially to the SMB market, which is a lot of SLED, it's state, local education, nonprofits, small, medium businesses, I wanted to have some actionable stuff for people to do. And it's really nice that we get to bring this back to CIS. So for anyone not familiar, we're talking about the CIS security controls. One other thing that CIS does is they have something called their benchmarks, and they have benchmarks for Windows, for all of their OSs, right? Windows, Linux, Mac. I don't know what else they have it for. That's primarily what I've used it for. But what I would recommend for everyone here to do, if you've got an organization, go to the CIS website. They have benchmarks. Pull down their benchmarks. It is going to have a cost of entry. That cost of entry is your email address. So they are going to require an email. You'll be able to pull a document down. And it is a guide of everything CIS recommends for your particular operating system on what you should enable, disable, what it does. Now, what I want to be very clear about is I do not recommend just implementing everything on that list. It is a list for you to evaluate in your infrastructure. You should go through and understand what all of those controls are, what all those options do, and if they're applicable in your environment. Prior to a few years ago, I told all of my customers, no matter what, you do not need LLM&R enabled in your environment. You simply don't.
Yeah.
And then I had a customer who did, who they went through a ton of M&A, and as soon as they disabled LLM&R, all of Exchange went down because it was, it was from a domain that was from 10 acquisitions ago. Literally, no one knew how this thing worked. It was a large organization. So now I'm more careful to say, there's a bunch of stuff in there that 99% of the world will never need to touch. But it's important that you go through the list, understand them, and then do your analysis yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I want to pivot off that just a quick second. Me being more focused on what ICs can take away from this. What I did when I first encountered the CIS controls is I pulled it down for the OSs that I cared about, was mainly around Linux. And I went through every control and understood why that control was significant and what were the attack vectors under which that control could be breached. And then also, how would I forensicate a violation of that control? So even if you're just in IC or you're a student or you're studying, the CIS controls are huge because of stuff like that. And actually, I had CIS on the phone for a large simulated tabletop that we were doing a few years ago. And I was very effusive in my praise of thanking them for all the hard work they did. And the person on the phone didn't do any of it, but I was just like, you guys are great. This is how I learned like some Linux security operating system stuff. So even if you're in IC, again, like pull them down, read them, get to know them. That's actually how I got to know like Mac security stuff more than just finding tutorials. Like attack is really great. And I love attack, obviously. But dude, the CIS guides, if you sort of reverse engineer it to figure out like what hacker stuff you can do, it's pretty cool.
Yep. And so just to continue that on a little bit, this might not apply to everybody, but there is a subset of people that watch this that are in the SLED market, so state and local education, or in academia. So you can be a researcher, you can be a student, anything else. There is a CAT tool, so it's the Cyber Assessment Toolkit that's provided by CIS, where if you do fit into one of those buckets, you can get a subscription to CIS for free. So it's their, I forget what it's called, it's like the Cyber Suite membership. It's free. And then they have assessment tools where instead of you going through and figuring out how you measure up against the standard, against the benchmark, it does that assessment for you and produces a report.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you're an organization, if you're a smaller organization, there's a lot of benefits to that CIS membership. Like even if you have a small organization, I think even if you have 250,000 employees, it's like 30 grand a year, which if you're that big, it's, you know, a rounding error.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's reasonably priced for most organizations. So, you know, if you don't feel like maybe you even have the deep understanding or the time to go in and do a manual assessment of your infrastructure, it's a really great place to just download a tool, let it run and give you the output.
Yep. So we talked about, you know, username and password, and we talked, you know, sort of generically about the different types of controls you might want to do. Like, what are some of the like default configuration stuff that you change when you're spinning up a new box, other than username and password?
So, I mean, I think the username and password is always a big thing. The next thing I typically do is shutting down services that we don't need.
Yeah.
And the challenge that I think that most organizations will find, especially in the SMB space, is when it runs on an appliance, when it's something that you may not have root access to. And you know, crazy timing in that today, Cisco just sent out an alert saying, hey, we accidentally on a bunch of our routers make our Redis infrastructure publicly available on an open port and can be remotely controlled.
Nice.
So it's looking for open ports. It's looking for insecure protocols. So, you know, RDP, Telnet, things that do default credentials. I always circle back to, you know, GPO in a Windows environment, because that's typically where I see it in most IR and most organizations. You know, I've had organizations suffer massive outages because of their configuration, where they enable users to control their firewalls. They enable users to control RDP options. So like open RDP, like somebody at home and their, you know, their provider at home allows people to, you know, just pass traffic on through their router. And then somebody from Russia, and I'm using Russia as an example, surely they wouldn't do something like this. Just brute forcing accounts, and it takes down Exchange and it takes down SharePoint because it's hitting those service accounts. And those are always really fun to track down.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more of an availability issue, but I've seen a variety of outages caused by bad BGP changes.
Yeah.
Where they advertise out a wrong range, or they black hole something, or like route flapping happens. And then, you know, it's just like, hey, you can't route for a while, which is a bad thing if you're running a website.
Yeah. Yeah. Just putting somebody on timeout.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, definitely the service minimization stuff is huge. I always try to look at like whatever default firewall, because again, I'm more on the Linux side of things. A lot of the stuff that I do anymore is at best Docker, but a lot of Lambda.
Yeah.
And so first, and this is a huge area, so we're not going to dive too deep into it, but like with Lambdas, I always have individual service accounts that only have the exact permissions they need. Because usually like a standard pattern for me would be to have an event bridge that triggers a Lambda to do something. And that Lambda probably writes to an SQSQ, probably writes to a Dynamo instance or managed Redis or whatever. And so just having a role that's just like, here's the event bridge execution role. Here's the SQS write role. Here's the SQS read role if I need one. And it can be pretty nasty, but eventually use things like Terraform or CloudFormation templates to manage that for you so it's invisible.
Yeah.
But you know, secure configuration management, I hope people don't think it's just appliances and servers, because it's arguably to a certain degree more significant in the cloud. Because if you have a user that, you know, drops their token and that user has like provisioning access, congratulations, you're now the third largest miner of Luna coin or whatever, you know, on Earth. So
yeah, that's when you start getting into the cloud, it's a whole other ball of wax, and that gets really painful really quick.
yeah.
I mean, my one experience there was, I mean, you can argue that this is a secure configuration in software, but realistically it was a bug. But like when Visual Studio, I think it was 2015, originally came out with GitHub integration, there's a little checkbox that said make my Git private. That checkbox didn't work day one. So anyone that clicked that box expecting their Git to be private, well, turns out it didn't work. And we had clients, one in particular, who put their AWS token in there, and off to the races somebody went with a Bitcoin miner.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, maybe one day I'll know someone who works at GitHub that might be able to help with something like that. But yeah, that's obviously that's probably more of a bug, but it is interesting, right? And there could be controlling Git pushes to public repos is a tremendously difficult problem. But I'm sure there's configuration options you can have on your network to help with that sort of thing. Like a web proxy might be able to kind of help, but Git's a binary protocol. So whenever people are like, oh, just grab the post request, I'm like, I see what you're saying, but like Git's a little more complicated than just that. So.
And I mean, realistically, and I kind of missed my point on that part because I just enjoyed that story so much. But just bringing it back to, hey, if you had a well-architected Git organization where you don't allow people to make a repo public, regardless of whether that, you know, device or software solution allows you to make it public, then you wouldn't have to worry about it, right? Setting organization level controls so that you don't have to worry about problems down the line.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you know, I think just circling back kind of as we wrap this one up, because I mean, this one's like pretty axiomatic, right? It's like figure out what's on your network, you know, learn how to configure it correctly. That's hosts, that's servers, and that's infrastructure as well. You know, like having a good, you know, management plane set up for all this stuff is huge. And don't forget to like have that continuous testing type suite. And then also, you know, cloud. I think CIS has cloud controls. I'm pretty sure they have one for AWS. So that's definitely worth checking out. I can't believe that stuff is technically, or it is free, right? Yeah. Like if you just give your email address, and I've definitely given my email address a bunch of times, and they don't beat you up too hard on the marketing side of things. So.
And even when they send you, it's typically more free information, right?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever gotten anything from CIS that says, hey, you should get our subscription or you should sign up for this. And I mean, they've never done that. It's all typically content of like, hey, here's a webinar you might be interested in.
Yeah.
And before we totally shut this down, I'm going to send you a reminder, Kevin, of a story of when we used to work together way back when it comes to like infrastructure and like seemingly unrelated or something people wouldn't look at. But you may not remember, but I came into the office after vacation, and as I'm walking back to my desk, I walked past some brand new Kyocera printers. And I walked back to the InfoSec group and I said, who has taken a look at the printers? And you all looked at me like, why would we look at printers, man? Like we have 1,000 other things to do. I was like, let's go see if they're running, you know, open port. Let's see if it's running an FTP service. Let's see if it's running default creds. And we ended up getting into it with basically something that was left at a default that shouldn't have been there. And then from there, we pulled the domain admin creds that were on it because they had scanned email. And instead of doing mailbox admin or something else that could only access people's mailboxes, they decided, hey, if we make a domain admin, everything just works.
Yeah.
Greatest day. We annoyed the heck out of the GRC organization who's like, we don't have a standard for printers. Now we do.
It slightly reminds me, and it's not quite the same, but like I would walk into meetings and they'd be like, all right, Kevin, here's the standard, take some stuff out. And I would come back adding 5 pages. And I'm like, I'm sorry, guys, I had to do this to you. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, there's so much stuff that you missed.
Yeah. You know, this is like, a really interesting area of like responsibility of like who owns secure configurations, because you would think it's security, but ideally the security team isn't provisioning a new exchange server, right? And like, how do you work with those infrastructure teams to make sure that they have good security standards that are sensible and don't completely block the business? Because you're right, that's where a lot of this stuff comes from, especially as it creeps in, is like, hey, this thing's not working, so let's just allow IP any, right? Or let's, give this permission like domain admin, or hey, this weird user account needs a debug right on its security like token. It's like, yeah, but we should have just spent the time to figure it out. And the same thing goes with like cloud services, and I'm guilty of this, is like,
Oh yeah.
I don't know the exact role that I need for Dynamo, so I'm just going to do Dynamo to read write. It's like,
Yeah.
no, but I don't really need to read. I just need to write from this particular role, and then it's a little broad. So
Yeah. Yeah, we're all guilty of that, especially when something goes wrong and we're not really sure what the cause is, and then you have an exec right about here wondering how long it's going to take to fix, and it's like, oh, permanent IP and fixed it. That's
yeah,
weird. Yeah.
because I don't think there's any business whose like moneymaker is just being secure, So
Yep.
there's that contention. So
Very
yeah.
good.
Any other crazy points you want to bring up on this, man?
No, I could have pivoted off of what you last said and talked about how governance should work in an organization, but I feel like that's a conversation way outside of the scope of this one. So
Yeah, that'll be a bonus episode on our Patreon in a few years.
yeah, what really grinds my gears?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that works. So then I guess, Kevin, if we wrap this up, where can folks reach you for important updates and information?
Yeah, you can hit me up at War on Shrugs on Twitter. I've been comparatively active on there, so you can definitely get a hold of me there. Find me on GitHub at Dagonis. That's where I host all the code that I write. Those are probably the best two ways to try to get a hold of me, or drop a comment. Make sure to like and subscribe. Let us know that you're interested in this stuff. I can't believe I'm actually saying that, but it is true, right? I'm going back, and we have now started releasing these videos and seeing the comments have been cool. Not that there's been that many yet, but we're getting there. So let us know what you think.
Yep. Yeah, just to circle back to that, I've gotten far more feedback than I ever would have thought from friends and coworkers, people that just happen to pass this on to other folks. All of it has been extremely positive. I appreciate the feedback.
All positive for you. I've heard some comments about my style, so we'll see.
I believe one of the first comments I got from an executive friend of mine was, I started the video and saw a gentleman in a flower Momo and wasn't sure where this was going to go, and then it got great.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I try to add a little flavor, right?
I love it.
Yeah,
it's distinctly you.
Try to be.
And for anyone that's looking to reach me, you can find me on LinkedIn, Mike Bonner. Again, Kevin and I are both on the, if this will show, the DC 480 Slack. So if you need an invite to that, that is available. But typically reach out to me on LinkedIn. Love to hear all the feedback. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Heck yeah. And what's coming up next? What's number 5?
Oh, number 5. I think you're going to like this one more than I will, because I think this is very axiomatic: account management.
Ooh, okay. That is
Especially
interesting.
as we get to IAM in the cloud.
Yeah, it is brutal, man. I have a lot of feelings on that. So, well, we're also talking about doing like sort of bonus content. I have some ideas for like not CIS Control related stuff that we might like splice in throughout the week. So if you're interested in that, let us know. If there's anything you want us to talk about, let us know, and we may try to cover it if we can talk even semi-intelligently about it. So
yeah. No, I basically have an opinion about everything.
Fair enough. All right, man. It was good talking to you. See you soon.
Thank you, Jess.
Bye.